Hello and welcome to Breaking Down, the series where we take an in-depth look at a Fire Emblem unit from a gameplay perspective. Before we start, I would like to thank the people who have backed the channel on Patreon, where for just £1 a month you can see the units that will be in this season of Breaking Down, as well as vote on the next unit from that list to be released. More on this at the end. Today, we will be looking at Rhea's loyal servant, Cyril. Whilst this series is not focused around plots, there is always a chance for spoilers, and certain elements of the game and its structure and story will inevitably be mentioned. So if that is a concern for you, feel free to give it a miss. Also, where relevant, this is considering the maddening difficulty on a regular new game file with no exploits or excessive grinding. Cyril is a member of the Church of Seiros, and as a result he does not start in any house, but instead becomes available as the game progresses. When exactly he becomes available depends on your route, with the earliest being Chapter 5 if you choose the Golden Deer or Blue Lions. If you go for Silver Snow, he becomes available as of Chapter 12, and in Crimson Flower he is not available at all. The differences in join times here between Silver Snow and his other two available routes obviously have quite a large impact on his overall strength. For the bulk of this video, we will mainly be discussing his performance in Azure Moon or Verdant Wind, although we will briefly discuss his Silver Snow performance too. To recruit Cyril on Chapter 5, the only thing that is checked is Byleth level, which at most has to be level 10, even with no support. This reduces by 2 for each support checkpoint, and for Chapter 5 you are likely going to be somewhere in the 8 to 10 range, so at most you may need to raise his support to a C and you can pick him up without having to go out of your way with no issues at all. It's a really easy requirement to hit. It's worth noting that since he is not a student, Cyril is unavailable for Chapter 7, and is also not available for any routes Chapter 13. For Silver Snow, he joins automatically and does not need to be recruited. Cyril has no crest, meaning he does not get any of the benefits that one may provide, as well as taking 10 damage whenever he uses relic weapons or equipment. This isn't really a huge deal either way, and there is definitely a case to be made that the option to take additional damage is actually of a bigger benefit to him than a crest would be, due to some of the tools in his kit. Cyril's personal ability is Aptitude, which increases all of his growths by 20%. For the sake of clarity, the stats displayed on screen do include the bonuses provided by Aptitude. This is, in essence, an extra point of every stat every 5 levels, which is pretty solid all around. The issue this provides with Cyril is that he doesn't actually make use of that many of his stats. The HP and strength undoubtedly end up being useful, and charm is never going to go unappreciated, but there is a reasonable case to be made that these are actually the only stats of his that are relevant. Dex will never be super high impact, and you could make the argument that speed, def, and res would be better being lower. As far as his actual growths go, you only have to take a look at some of them to see that it isn't as though this is elevating Cyril to some extreme highs. 30% defense and resistance, 35% charm, and 40% strength are still pretty underwhelming, and whilst he does have some stronger areas, 60% dex and speed and 55% HP, these aren't exactly mind-blowing numbers. They are around where you would expect a unit's higher stats to be, although 2 60s and a 55 is a little higher in terms of the volume. So he has some underwhelming stats and some that stand out, with neither being too remarkable. His growths are slightly above average, but all in all I wouldn't necessarily call him a growth-based unit. Overall, this isn't exactly a premier personal ability or anything, but the extra stats in the relevant areas will play an impact over the course of the game. Its biggest issue is the lack of immediate impact, but as a whole I would say Cyril appreciates having this. As for his actual bases, firstly bear in mind that he joins at level 9 on Chapter 5 at the earliest, so these aren't level 1 bases like most units. Past that however, his bases, well, they still aren't very good. In fact, that's putting it lightly. If Ash, a unit with relatively poor stat lines across the board, leveled in Commoner until level 9, he would come out with the same or more strength, more dex and speed, and similar defense and charm, and that's assuming you don't class him up at level 5, which would be very odd. So, Cyril has no crest, slightly above average growths which take up his personal ability, and bad bases. It's sounding pretty rough for him right now. Is there any redemption? Well, if what you were looking for is arguably the best spread of skill modifiers in the game with great rewards nestled within them, then yeah, there is definitely redemption. Cyril has boons in lances, axes, bows, riding, and flying, with his only banes being in the 2 magical areas, reason and faith. Before we go any further, this is already insane. The banes pretty much do not matter in the slightest, and the boons hit every skill that is required for Brigand, Archer, Cavalier, Paladin, Wyvern Rider, Sniper, Wyvern Lord, and Bow Knight, any of which can be a valuable class to go into with the right build. Hitting boons in every area for one ideal masterclass is not exactly common. Hitting it for 2 is incredible, not to mention so many developmental classes along the way. On top of this, his spread of skills means he can reach almost any class he may want to patch up his shaky bases without too much investment being needed. Past this, what he actually gets from these skills is once again very, very good. There are 2 real standouts here. The first of these comes from his bow rank at the C+ level, and that is Point Blank Volley. This is a one-range bow combat art that has a brave effect, meaning it always attacks twice in succession. On top of this, it has a +3 damage amplifier, and provides an additional 10 hit. The only other unit who has access to this is Leone, who gets it at A bows, so Cyril getting it at C+ is a massive benefit to him, especially when you consider that he comes with C bows upon his recruitment, meaning very little investment is needed to push him up to this. This is a really strong late game tool that Cyril gets very early on. Honestly, it's difficult to fault this. It's an outstanding asset that would be greatly appreciated on any character. Having access to something so powerful at just a C+ rank in a boon area is incredible, which is why it only gets more ridiculous that at C+ Lancers, Cyril gets access to Vengeance. This is a combat art which gains 1 point of might for each point of missing health, allowing for insane damage numbers very early in the game. Cyril's Lancers may only start at an E rank, but with the boon in the area, it won't take him long at all to gain access to this. Once again, you really can't complain. Vengeance is an extremely desirable combat art that gives so much damage potential, and again, any unit would appreciate this. You might think that these 2 tools invalidate each other, or that you don't need both, but it really isn't the case. They do offer things that are distinct to each other that means one never makes the other irrelevant. Vengeance has the much higher damage ceiling, however it also requires setup, whereas Point Blank Volley is capable of hitting right out of the gate. Or, if Cyril needs to eat a hit on the enemy phase, you can heal him up to full health, while still having a great damage tool. Point Blank Volley also offers effective damage against flying enemies, and since it hits 2 times, you reap the benefits of any damage amplifiers twice. Once again, Cyril can go into almost any class he would want to take advantage of these. Perfect boons to hit every area required for Paladin, Bow Knight, and Wyvern Lord really cannot be understated, offering access to Lance and Bowfair as well as a flying option to facilitate great movement, with all 3 of these possessing 8 move and Canto. Overall, Cyril's skills are almost impeccable and really add so much to his kit, both in terms of the tools it gives him access to and the class pathing options that it gives him throughout the game. So with all of that said and done, let's get into actually using Cyril. I'm going to start out with his Azure Moon and Verdant Wind performance, since that makes up the bulk of his use. The first thing to note is that you want to recruit Cyril ASAP in most cases, because when not recruited, aptitude is not factored into his growths. When Cyril first joins, your first objective should absolutely be picking up Point Blank Volley by pushing his bows from C to C+. This can be done very quickly and gives him a huge power spike right from the get-go. There is one thing that I think needs to be addressed with Cyril, which is how strong he actually is at this point. I've sometimes seen the take that he still takes some time to get going, but this is selling him a little short. If you give him a Steel Bow Plus, and equip him with the E-Rank House Brawlers Battalion at the max rank, and class him into Fighter, which he already meets the requirements for, Point Blank Volley one-rounds almost every enemy on Chapter 5, with the exception of the Armor Knights and the bosses. That does raise the question of what to do with Cyril's class as soon as you get him. You can either keep him in Commoner and look to get HP plus 5, or class into Fighter and look to push towards Strength plus 2. Commoner will be mastered much quicker for HP plus 5, probably within a single map, which is quite relevant, but Fighter does have some better immediate impact. If you can find a way to boost Cyril's strength by 1, such as through a Rocky Burdock, you may want to opt for Commoner right off the bat. Otherwise, I think Fighter is the play for the aforementioned 1 rounds. It's worth noting you can always go back for the other skill later. When you recruit Cyril, he is level 9, and so 1 level short of hitting an intermediate class. He already comes with the skill requirements to reach Archer and Brigand, which are 2 classes he will want to go into in this period, so no investment is needed with regards to this. This means you are free to start investing in Cyril's Lancers in order to acquire Vengeance as soon as you have acquired Point Blank Volley, without getting sidetracked by anything else. The one exception to this could be Authority, which would benefit him quite a lot by letting Cyril make use of better battalions. Pushing Heavy Armor up to E+, can also be useful to gamble for an Armor Knight certification, to bump Cyril's defense up to 12. This requires D Heavy Armor and C Axes to guarantee the qualification, but since he comes with the Axe rank, you can gamble it a little earlier with little downside. You wouldn't actually want to use Armor Knight here, mostly just make use of the base defense buff. You can also go into Cavalier by raising his riding rank to a D to guarantee the certification, along with the lance ranks gained on the way to Vengeance. This is a very high performance class at this point, thanks to its 7 move and canto. From here, let's revisit some of those developmental intermediate classes. Brigand requires C axes, which once again is already met at base, and once mastered provides the Death Blow ability. This provides 6 damage when the user initiates combat. The plus 6 damage is already great, but with point blank volley providing very early opportunities to really amplify this effect by taking advantage of it twice, it's clear to see why this is extremely desirable. Archer requires C bows, which again is met at base. Mastering this class gives you the ability Hit plus 20. This has the self-explanatory effect of increasing the hit of all attacks by 20. This includes gambits, which can really help to compensate for Cyril's Rocky Charm stat, as well as just providing a lot more consistency all around with anything he tries to hit with. Both of these skills are extremely desirable, so you will absolutely want to bag them both. I would usually go for Death Blow first, since the damage impact is greatly appreciated. Of the two classes themselves, Archer is the better of the two, thanks to its innate bow range plus 1, so once you master them, if you do choose to sit in one until level 20, Archer would be the choice here, although in terms of overall performance, Cavalier does outshine them both. From here, you will want to start considering your endgame pathing, as this is where that will really start to play an impact. Whilst there are a lot of options available to Cyril, there are 2 that really stand out. A mounted path towards Bow Knight, or a flying path towards Wyvern Lord. For both of these options there are a lot of merits to them, and both of them are extremely strong. Which one is better can vary based on quite a few factors. I'm going to go down the class pathing for each one first, and then touch on the factors that may influence which one you want to commit to. Starting off with Bow Knight, the first thing to note is that it obviously feels the benefit if you choose to go down Cavalier at an intermediate stage, since you will already have some riding experience invested, reducing the amount you need later on. At an advanced level, the best option is Paladin, with requirements of B riding and B lancers. Since you will have already raised lancers to C+ to grab Vengeance, all you need to do is raise riding to be able to gamble the certification with a really solid chance of success, and since the end goal of this path is Bow Knight, you will want to raise riding anyway. If you did want to bump lancers up to guarantee the certification, this isn't a bad investment either, as it puts you closer to the higher ranks of lance prowess for additional accuracy with Vengeance or other lance-based attacks. Sniper is also a valid option, however I much prefer the 8 move and canto over Sniper's 5 move with added range, especially with point blank volley and Vengeance both being 1 range attacks. Bowfare is definitely nice, but Lancefare also makes a valid contribution. Sniper does provide Hunter's Volley when mastered, but honestly, a third kill tool really isn't necessary, and whilst its range is nice, it comes at a hefty cost with the much lower movement and lack of canto access. I don't think Sniper is bad here, but I do think Paladin is the better option. If you did choose to go for Sniper, its requirements are A bows. From here, the Bow Knight path leads to, well, Bow Knight. This is your master class, and the one you will probably spend the remainder of the game in. The requirements here are A bows, A riding, and C lancers, which are more than attainable using the pathing outlined, especially if you are happy to gamble it a little lower. Once again, Bow Knight comes with 8 move and canto, but instead of Lancefare comes packing Bowfare, as well as bow range plus 2, which increases the range of bow attacks by 2. I'll go more into how this weighs up later, however for now, let's take a look at the pathing for a Wyvern Lord route. This is very simple. At an intermediate stage, you want to go into Wyvern Rider, which requires B axes and C flying to guarantee it. With the C+ base axe rank, this can be pushed up to B very easily. The same goes for flying, despite needing to be raised a little more, the boon makes it more than attainable. Wyvern Rider comes with 7 move and canto along with flight, allowing for great mobility. From here, all that's left to do is to jump into Wyvern Lord at level 30. This requires C lancers, A axes, and A flying. This is more than attainable with the time given, and similar to the other path, already has the lance rank ticked off from grabbing Vengeance earlier, which means axes and flying just need to be bumped up. Wyvern Lord increases the 7 move of Wyvern Rider up to 8, while once again coming with flight and canto, to make the class's mobility even better. So, what are the merits of each of these paths? Well, for Wyvern Lord, it is more of one very big merit, and that is access to flight. This can drastically increase movement potential, especially on certain maps and on certain routes. In general, Azure Moon is more favourable to mounted units, providing much less terrain that hinders them, whereas flight can be much more impactful in the other routes, in this case affecting Verdant Wind quite noticeably. Flight in general though is always extremely useful, and is not something to factor in lightly to your decision making, as it makes getting into position to kill these enemies off much easier, and also makes it easier to canto out afterwards. That being said, there are some advantages to being grounded too. The first of these is battalions. The amount of grounded battalions, especially those that provide a lot of benefits, is a lot higher than the amount of flying battalions. This means that Cyril is much more likely to get his hands on a more advantageous battalion to further enhance his performance. Flying battalions are typically heavily contested too, meaning that not only are his options in a flying class more limited, but those limited options face a lot of competition. Another advantage of the grounded class is the ability to take advantage of guard adjutants. These ensure that follow-up attacks from being doubled will not kill Cyril, making it extremely easy to reach 1 HP, maximising Vengeance's damage. There are no flying guard adjutants, so this isn't something Cyril can take advantage of if he opts to take to the skies. There are other ways to get chunked down, and a good bulk of the time Cyril definitely won't need to be this low for reaching damage thresholds, but it does add security to setting up, which can absolutely be appreciated. One thing that looks to be in Bow Knight's favour quite heavily is the damage output, since those premier combat arts can take advantage of Paladin's Lance Fair or Bow Knight's Bow Fair, whilst the Wyvern class's Axe Fair doesn't synergise with these. There is some truth to this, but the gap isn't quite as glaring as it initially seems, especially when comparing Bow Knight to Wyvern Lord, due to the class's strength modifiers. Bow Knight only provides 1 additional strength whilst in the class, whereas Wyvern Lord provides 4 providing you are mounted. This means that using point-blank volley between the two classes only provides 2 more damage per hit for Bow Knight as opposed to the 5 it initially seems to be. Meanwhile, that strength modifier gives Wyvern Lord 3 more damage on its Vengeance compared to the master mounted alternative. This leads to the damage between the two being a lot more even than it initially seems, although you can definitely make the case that the point-blank volley damage matters a lot more, as Vengeance is likely to be overkilling by a sizable amount for both classes on most enemies. Bow Knight's bow range +2 can also give it some advantages when not making use of the combat arts too, and you can take advantage of this in conjunction with something like a Brave Bow or the Inexhaustible to secure kills from a bigger range, which can prove advantageous in quite a few scenarios. It may seem like Bow Knight takes the cake in terms of how many advantages it has, however it really is important to stress how impactful flight can be, and the two classes are a lot closer than they initially seem. I don't think there's an incorrect choice here. One thing that is more of an option with the Wyvern variant is to go for a dual phasing build, by acquiring the skills Vantage and Wrath, to give Cyril a lot of enemy phase competence. This is very high investment, both in terms of what Cyril needs to do to get there and the tools he actually requires whilst doing this, but it can give quite a big payoff. Vantage is acquired from mastering the Mercenary class, which requires sea swords to guarantee qualification, and is available at an intermediate level. This skill allows the user to attack first when the opponent initiates combat, providing the user is below 50% HP. Wrath is obtained from mastering the advanced class, Warrior, which requires 8 axes to guarantee qualification, hence why this is more synergistic with the Wyvern build, which has the same axe requirement. This ability has the same requirements as Vantage. The opponent initiates combat when the user is below 50% HP. However, its effect grants the user a massive boost of 50 crit, which means that on the enemy phase, Cyril will attack first with a massively inflated crit chance. The goal here is to stack this with other crit boosting tools, such as killer weapons, crit boosting battalions, a crit ring, etc., to guarantee crits on the enemy phase. The HP triggers for Wrath and Vantage here are quite negligible, since you will already be going low health to maximise Vengeance damage, which is why this can be quite a tempting option to go for to expand Cyril's strength to both phases of the game. Whilst this provides some benefits to Cyril, there are some drawbacks too. As mentioned, the cost for this investment is very high. Getting Wrath and Vantage requires raising swords to qualify for Mercenary, as well as mastering both it and Warrior, the latter of which requires 150 classy XP. On top of this, crit boosting battalions are not exactly common, so committing one of these to Cyril here is also quite significant. There is also a question of how his skills line up with this, since Wrath, Vantage, Deathblow and Hit +20 only leaves room for one of the prowess skills, likely Lance prowess, as this will be the weapon type you employ on the enemy phase, as well as still helping with Vengeance, which means as a result point blank volley will function slightly worse. It's up to you if you want to go for this. It certainly is an option and it does give some positive benefits, however it is not without its flaws, so whether or not you choose to go for this is entirely up to you. This about wraps up the Verdant Wind and Azure Moon Cyril performances. A lot of flexibility available, and a boatload of power whatever you go for. When you get Cyril in one of those routes, he is an incredibly powerful unit who reaches some large power spikes very early on that can add a lot to almost any roster. As for his Silver Snow performance, there is a lot less to say around it, as he just isn't around for as long. In this route, the stats he joins with are even more underwhelming than his Chapter 5 join stats. Joining at this time leads to him having numbers like 15 strength and 11 defense at level 21. That's just 2 strength higher than Byleth and Edelgard at level 1. Obviously this is not ideal, however it isn't too hard to correct, thanks again to Cyril's excellent spread of boons. Your first port of call for Cyril here has to be his classing, mainly getting him into Wyvern Rider. This will require getting his flying up to scratch as he already has the axe rank at base. Fortunately, you can gamble this qualification with just a D rank in flying if you're happy to chance it, so this can be attained very quickly. Wyvern Rider will bump his base strength up to 18 and then when in the class give it an extra boost of 3, taking him up to a much more acceptable 21. Similar to other routes, this is also a very strong class at this point in time for Cyril anyway, so it's not like you're going out of your way to fix his stats up, it's the class he wants to be in for a performance perspective. From here, it becomes a lot more straightforward. You want to pick up Vengeance as it is still Cyril's best damage tool, and reaching C+ Lancers is still a very attainable requirement that is more than worth the investment. Since Cyril joins with B bows, you don't have to worry about getting point blank volley since he comes with it once you recruit him, and is ready to make use of it from the get-go. Once you have this setup, honestly Cyril is in a functional position to contribute well on your team. The biggest thing he is lacking here is those developmental skills, Death Blow and Hit plus 20, the former of which may limit his kill power or require him to take more damage to set up, and the latter can cause accuracy issues. You do have options around this however. The first is to qualify for the classes and master them through being an adjutant. If you have a grounded enemy phase unit, you can get through this very quickly, especially with the use of the Knowledge Gem. Since Cyril starts with the Axe and Bow ranks, qualifying for the classes doesn't require any investment outside of seals. The other option is to just skip one or even both of them. Since Cyril joins when Hubert and Edelgard leave, you may want to make use of him right away. It will obviously hurt his overall performance, but it's not like this completely invalidates him or anything like that. It will just knock some enemies out of his kill range or present some potential consistency issues. It is a valid option, but personally I would just pick them up via adjutanting. It's also worth noting that if you do tend to do Orcs battles, this choice becomes a lot easier and you should obviously grab them. Whichever you choose to go for, Cyril will still contribute well, and if you do choose to make use of him here, you can definitely get a lot of benefit from him. His performance is worse than in the other two routes, and he does have the unfortunate situation of joining at a similar time to a lot of other units, noticeably Seteth, another flyer who performs very well at this period of time. However, Cyril can still contribute and be a valuable asset to your roster. This pretty much wraps up Cyril, a unit with a kit that is extremely strong in certain areas and has a lot of very strong pathing options with some nice flexibility in there too, which overall gives you a unit who can perform to an exceptional level for almost his entire availability. I hope this helps you to get the most out of him. I would once again like to thank the people who have backed the channel on Patreon, as well as all of you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video.